am I responding the same way I would on my best day?
Hey, welcome back to the Church Staff Book Club. My name is Jonathan Malm.
And I'm Jason Young.
And we are now on chapter 2 of our book, a book that Jason and I wrote called Likeable Leader. I was telling Jason right before we started recording that I really like this book. Like, we wrote it, but I haven't read it in maybe a year and a half.
Yeah.
Maybe longer. And it's really good.
Yeah.
Not to toot our own horn, but
that's funny. It's like you surprise your own self. You're like, wait a minute, whoever wrote this? Oh, wait a minute. It was us.
It is really good. So, I mean, here's the premise of the book. If you're just joining us now, the idea is, I think we're all afraid of the idea of wanting to be liked with good reason. But the reality is leaders that people like get better results from their teams. People trust them more. They're willing to take risks with them. They invite people to join the team. So it is to your benefit to be more likable. But the key is, it's not about like just being a people pleaser.
Yep.
It's really about kindness. It comes down to kindness, showing kindness the way that it's modeled by Jesus, honestly, the way that it's modeled in scripture for us. So there's a lot of scripture in here, a lot of biblical truths in here. It's not just about being the guy that everyone wants to hang out with. It is about being a leader that truly loves people, that then people want to follow. So, and this chapter is about integrity, but not in the way that we typically talk about integrity in the church. It's Jason, how do we talk about integrity? What's our point about integrity with this chapter?
Well, if you were to see the word integrity, you might assume, oh, they're going to talk about morality. And not true. Not that that's not super important. This approach is, we're talking more about consistency, because consistency as the leader creates safety for the team. In other words, we talk about what does it look like to be a leader that is predictable to other people on the team. How can you show up consistent like that?
Exactly. And predictability does not mean that you don't take big swings, big risks, that you don't do something, you don't pivot somewhere that, you weren't planning on going this way and then you pivot. Really, predictability more has to do with your character. And I think I always think of integrity like an engine, The engine is supposed to run at a fast pace. It can go fast, it can go slow. It can be pretty unpredictable in the way that it moves. But the idea is, if there's any weakness, if there's any inconsistency in the way that engine works, it breaks down. Yeah. And so you always want the engine to have integrity, to have a fullness, working correctly, working consistently. That's what we're wanting to have with our lives and with our leadership as well. So yeah, you do want to be predictable, meaning, okay, that person, Jonathan took a big risk. I'm following Jonathan. He took a huge risk, but that is consistent with how Jonathan acts. That risk was consistent with what he values, with how he acts, with what I would expect from him. Like, yes, that was the right choice for Jonathan, because that's what Jonathan does. Whereas I think a lot of times we have unpredictability whenever it comes to, if I take a risk, is Jonathan going to like it this time, or is he going to hate it this time? Is he going to be mad that it failed, or is he going to be happy that I took the risk? Is Jonathan okay with feedback right now, or is he going to feel threatened by the feedback and lash out at me because, I touched the one sensitive area that he wasn't willing to have feedback in, right? And I think that's what it comes down to is does your team know what to expect when they encounter you?
Yeah. In fact, when you were talking, Jonathan, I thought, if you're watching or listening right now, think about the best leader you've ever worked for. Doesn't matter if you're in business world, if you're in church world, just think about the best leader you've ever worked for. I suspect one of the things you appreciate most about that leader isn't that they were like exciting or splashy or always had the best ideas. It's that you knew what to expect from them. So talking about consistency, that's why we think in this book, specifically in this chapter, consistency is really one of the greatest gifts a leader can give their team. So hopefully, as we walk through this chapter today, you can ask yourself, like, am I that leader? And we're going to give you maybe some questions to ponder, but not just for yourself, but for you to ask other people. Because in here, we're going to talk about being self-aware. And I'll say this on the front end, you can't become self-aware by yourself.
Yeah.
You need the insights of other people. So as we unpack this, just begin to kind of think to yourself, am I the leader that is consistent and can give that gift to my team?
Yeah, that's really good. So, I mean, one of the things we talk about in the book is the idea that a lot of times we lose our predictability whenever we have like a big opportunity.
Mm,
Sometimes, and we'll talk about this later, why this becomes an issue. But let's say you're faced with this really cool opportunity that does not align with the way you would normally act, but it's a huge opportunity. And so you compromise and you, again, not compromising morally. I'm not talking about, now you lied to get that opportunity, but the things that you've been telling your team, like, hey, this is what's important to us, this is what we value, but now this opportunity comes along, and it's just for the sake of the opportunity, you do something totally different than the way what you've been preaching. Honestly, that's
mm.
one way where I think people a lot of times kind of lose their integrity in the minds of their team. Again, feel like we have to say this again, not integrity of morality, but integrity of that person isn't who he says he was.
Yeah.
Another time is whenever you're disappointed with someone. So, you are uh, maybe a friendly person. You are willing to have, willing for people to take risks, willing for people to be themselves, but then you get disappointed with them and you become a different person around them.
Mm,
You see that a lot in you see that a lot in really, I guess, narcissistic leaders where man, this leader is wonderful. Is so you just they're magnetic, they're wonderful, they're amazing until you disappoint them, and then suddenly you're out. You're on the outs with
mm,
them. You can no longer, if you speak up, they have this derisive look toward you. I've seen it a lot. I have a lot of friends who've seen it a lot. There's not much we can do to help you with narcissism if you're like actually a diagnosed narcissist, but it can manifest in more subtle ways than that. Stress at home, a lot. That's a lot of times. I feel like there's so many times that I've seen leaders, and maybe my wife has been like, "Why are they acting that way?" And I am the person that assumes the best by assuming the worst, meaning there's probably something happening at their home. Like,
mm,
honestly, probably their marriage is threatened, something with their children is threatened, and they're acting out in their leadership because of that. We can't always do that. And we talk about there's opportunity for bad days, but really is it like becoming a season or is it becoming a
mm,
bad day? And that's the difference, right? Organization, is the organization taking a step back? I see this a lot of times in churches where like when the organization is growing, it's easy to have integrity because everything's going well. But when the
mm,
organization is starting to shrink and you maybe feel threatened, you feel in a fight or flight mode, uh, that happens. Is your position being threatened? Same thing. Are you in fight or flight because someone is threatening your position? Or do you feel like you're personally attacked, like who you are? I remember I worked with a, a pastor. We had such great rapport. I would joke with him about everything. He was a young adults pastor. And one day I said, hey, you're the young adults pastor. It'd be funny if we call you the Yap, like, because you like, you talk. And he was like, Jonathan, I do not like that. And I mean, it wasn't like, he didn't completely lose trust in my mind, but I'm like, oh, there's some parts of our relationship I can't get into that I thought we were there and we weren't there.
yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
again, that one thing, it was one instance, but if those instances start stacking up, I start realizing, oh, I'm not safe around this person. And you talked
Yeah.
about that before. Safety is such a big deal when we talk about, do I like this leader?
Yeah. When you think about creating, when you're the leader that creates a safe space, we hear that in terms of our life and family oftentimes. But when you think about you're the leader that creates the safe space, we've talked about consistency, right? We've talked about dependability, and people trust leaders they can predict. Again, it doesn't mean that you don't do risks or,
Yeah.
we're not talking about that.
It's your character that's predictable, not your actions necessarily,
Yeah,
or your
that's what it is.
movements. Maybe your organizational movements. Maybe would be the word.
Yeah, or for people wouldn't go like, "Ooh, that was out of character." Like we're
Yeah.
talking about just the predictable pattern, right, of choices and behaviors. And so, Jonathan, you're talking about safety, and what's interesting about that is sometimes I I think as a leader, we think people on our team fear certain things when we lead them, and the reality is sometimes those fears are not true, and this is one of them when it comes to safety. So, for example, I hear a lot of leaders say church world, business world doesn't matter because they're all humans, right? But in the
Yeah.
world of leadership, well, people fear correction or feedback. And what's fascinating is whether I'm working with a church or a business, the people on the team, those following the leader, they fear the unpredictability of that leader more than they fear the correction from the leader. So
Yeah.
we go back to predictability, consistency being
Or
a
I would
big
say
thing.
they fear that the leader is unhappy with them and they don't know about it, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. And if you're a great leader, a healthy leader, you understand that when you can remove unnecessary uncertainty, then you are perceived, you are sensed in a likable manner. In fact, Jonathan and I wrote a book, Don't Burn Out, Burn Bright. And in it, when we talk about burnout, a lot of times we think of burnout being related to workload. That may
Yeah.
be the case, or a
It can,
variety of
yeah.
other things. But one thing we don't think about burnout for many people, they don't think about is, but a key contributor to burnout is uncertainty. And when people have excessive uncertainty, it is actually an accelerator to burnout because they're not sure, am I working on the right thing? Is it what they want? And you're spinning over here and you're mentally telling yourself stories that may or may not be true. You're not sure, am I
Yeah.
working on the right thing? Oh, nope, not the right thing, wrong direction. So when you create a safe space, people have this consistent, predictable experience with you. And you as a leader remove uncertainty. Because you know this. If you're watching, listening, you know this. May it be a reminder.
Yeah.
Your team will perform better when they trust your character as a leader because it is predictable and it is consistent. So I know this is going to sound so cliche, Jonathan, but maybe I'm saying this for myself, but maybe I'm saying this for somebody else. The people on your team, they don't expect you to be a perfect leader, but they do expect and need you to be a predictable one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I mean, if we're talking about, we love in leadership, we love like war metaphors, right? Is you want to know that the person that you're going to battle with is going to cover you when you need to be covered,
Yeah.
is going to be there when you need them to be there. It is the difference between being a Rambo or being an army, right? Like Rambo is like the one person who does everything and like, no one's going to come to his aid. He just has to do it all himself. Versus the army is, I have to move forward and it's a very risky thing, but I know that we're sharing the risk and I know that my teammate is covering me, is providing cover fire so that I can move forward to at least alleviate some of the stress, at least take some of that burden away. But whenever you don't trust the people that you're with, whenever you don't trust that they're operating under the same values or training or whatever it is, you can't trust them, and it's you're not going to take the step forward that you need to take. That's so often why, you have these training situations in military that they seem so dumb,
Hmm.
but because they're trying to reduce the unpredictability of their soldiers, right? They're trying to make sure that the soldiers are going to act consistently with how they've been trained. Um, yeah, it's important to note before we move on, though, that just because you're predictable doesn't mean that you're going to be likable. We talk about this in the chapter, that sometimes
Yeah.
you can be predictably. When we were talking through this chapter, remember, this was your idea. This was one of your ideas. Is that like the idea that you can be predictably unlikable? Like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
Jonathan acting in the same way. And I remember when we were writing this, we were talking about like, okay, what is behind that? Like,
Yeah.
why is predictability great in some situations and bad in others? And what we came up with is the idea that a lot of times the predictability is predictability because based on a bad belief. So that guy is predictably untrusting.
Hmm.
He never trusts anyone. I can always predict he's not going to like my idea, or he's not going to like something that I came up with, or the fact that I'm taking a risk. And that's a lot of times what are some other things that you feel like people have kind of bad beliefs in life that cause them to be predictably unlikable?
I don't know that we often think of terms of our behavior, but I think it's the behavior that we demonstrate that helps people to mentally assimilate patterns of that person's likable, that person's not. For example, if you're in a meeting and you're the leader and people share ideas and you respond typically negative or, dismissive, or you compare ideas, maybe you have one, well, I was already thinking about that one, and then you plus it up
Yeah.
as if, you're by comparison better. Like that's a way that and you do that consistently, again, we're talking about predictable patterns. We all are going to have these things happen in isolation, right? These one-offs or anomalies. But I'm talking about these predictable patterns. So if you were to do that fairly consistently, it's not it's not enjoyable. So what you're going to eventually get because of your behavior, people are going to be less inclined to share ideas or because of what's going to happen. They know you're predictable. They know what's going to happen. I can avoid it. I just won't share an idea. If people ask a question, if somebody asks a question and your facial expressions, your tone, your words, like, well, that's dumb. You may not say it like that, but you say it like that. Then people are going to be trained because of your pattern of behavior. You know what? I'll just play it safe. I won't ask questions. Or if someone on your team makes a mistake, what is your behavior as it relates to the mistake? We're not suggesting overlook it, celebrate it in the sense that it becomes nothing and not a learning lesson, but your response to it, your behavioral response to it, gives that person an understanding of how you will respond in future failures that they might make. So people are drawing these, they tend to be more on the likable scale. They tend to be more on the unlikable scale because of behavioral experiences they have with you. Remember this, by definition, being unlikable, what it feels like means that it's the absence of care and sensitivity. So if you come across like you don't care, facial expressions, tone, words, body language, whatever that looks like, or a combo of all of them, or if you lack sensitivity, you're dismissive, you're not validating, you don't listen, you hear enough to respond, then it feels that those are unlikable behaviors. So all of that to say, long answer, Jonathan, to your question is we have to pay attention to the behaviors that we demonstrate, because that is what will help people form the predictable patterns of whether Jonathan or Jason tend to be more on the likable side or on the unlikable side.
Well, I would say that there are beliefs behind each one of those three responses you gave. So if you are always one-upping people, the false belief that you have is that your value is being the smartest person in the room.
True.
And that is something that you need to, if we talk about in the next, some keys to figuring this out is you need to realize that is what is going on in my head, or that's what's going on in my heart, is I feel like I need to be the smartest person in the room, or the most creative person in the room, or the most put together person in the room. If people are asking questions and you scoff at questions, that would be a faulty belief that people are dumb, that people should know everything already. People are ignorant. And sometimes the reality is people just ask questions because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. Like they're just like, hey, can I clarify? And it feels like a dumb question, but it's sometimes because they feel unsafe in your presence that they're clarifying that question. And unfortunately, them asking that question and the belief that you already have further reinforces the idea that, well, they're all dumb, they're all incompetent, and I'm the only one who knows anything around here. There was another one.
Yeah. I didn't used to believe this until I experienced it, which you're like, well, duh. But I hate to say this, but unfortunately, sometimes some of the most arrogant, punk-oriented leaders that I have experienced work in the church. And I've worked for them, and it should not be that way.
Yeah.
If anything, the closer you get to the center of an organization, the center of a business, but especially the center of a church, the healthier and kinder it should look and feel like. But unfortunately, for many, they don't. For many, they do, right? So I don't want to discredit those that do, because they do exist.
There's extremes, right? You're seeing extremes on one side,
They're extremes. But I have found that some leaders, like, even when you mentioned asking questions, it's like, well, don't ask me that kind of question. Don't you know who I am? I'm the senior leader. I'm the XP. I'm the senior pastor. I don't have time for that. Or, there's this elevation of position, forgetting that God put you there. Oh, and by the way, he can also remove you from there. And it's approaching the position with humility to be the leader that Jesus is trusting you to be, to demonstrate his kindness, to demonstrate sensitivity and care to the people you lead. But I am convinced, because I have seen it and I have worked for them, and God forbid, I hope I haven't been one. I'm sure somebody will email me or text me if I
Yeah.
have, that they're egotistical, arrogant punks. And I'm
Well, and
sorry,
I think it
but it shouldn't
requires
be in the church.
yeah, it requires a constant renewing of the mind and a constant asking God to show you your heart. Because I do think there's this reality of like, especially in larger organizations, there's kind of this thing that happens like with surgeons, right? Where like you have surgeons that are like operating on someone's heart, and one little nick here will just spurt blood everywhere and kill the person, and they're talking about what how they're going to go watch a game this weekend, right? Like there's this sort of detachment that happens whenever you're dealing with life and death on a regular basis, that like this is just what I do, and it's just I have to make those decisions, and and you can become callous a little bit to the fact that you're actually holding people's lives in your hands. I think that is sometimes what happens is we just get so, what is it? Familiarity breeds contempt. The
Yeah.
idea that we're just so familiar with having to make these decisions that are big decisions that we can kind of be callous in the way we approach it. And it just
Yeah.
requires, hey, God, soften my heart regularly, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that is the
Yeah.
key.
Yeah. I
But
think when you said, leading like Jesus with, care and especially, kindness. And I think you're right. It does take that. Some of you listening, you're like, man, when Jason was talking, like, who hurt him? you know,
I mean, I've
and,
seen it
and
too. I hesitate to say that because it does seem like we're just like ragging on churches, but like, because there are gems. I've worked with, man, I'm like the guy's
totally.
heart, like
Yes.
incredible hearts in the church, and even in large
Yes.
organizations. That doesn't mean that like I've seen large organizations where like this person loves people. Like, yeah,
Yes. Yeah, I have too. And I'm not dismissing those. I just kind of am parenthetical note here that it just surprises me over the years. Again, I'm 28 years in,
yeah.
and I have a chance. Been on a lot of church, not a lot, several church staffs over the years. And I've
List them all
also,
so we can try to guess who you're talking. Just joking.
yeah. and I've also worked with a lot of, corporations. And sometimes I'm like, man, the kindest, healthiest leaders should be in the place that God Almighty invites us to join him in the work that he's already doing and is responsible for. And
Yeah.
that alone is significantly humbling. And again, I'm not perfect. I've had, ego as well. But I just think it's this thing for us to just do a little bit of a check, because that could quickly eclipse what integrity and likability looks like, is when we allow that ego to take over.
Here's maybe another part of it too is sometimes, we have the saying, we've talked about this before, the idea that we get to do this. There
Mhm.
is this reality that working for a church that is effective, that is moving the ball forward for the kingdom, it is exciting. It is a wonderful opportunity. It is like there's no greater thing than that. People will give up, six-figure salaries to go work at a church for, half the money because of that thing. And I think sometimes we take that for granted. Well, of course they wouldn't want to leave. Whereas if you're working in an industry, you know that like, hey, if I'm a jerk, there's 20 other companies that are just as good as ours that they'll go work for. And so you kind of almost for like a self-preservation aspect, you're like, I need my employees to be happy here because otherwise we're going to lose them to someone else. And I think there is a reality that sometimes in our church, we're like, well, we're the best thing going. Like, so of course, like, well, I don't need to treat them kindly. Their reward is in heaven. We kind of say those things. And I've seen that on volunteer teams too, where it's like, no, I'm not going to show them appreciation. They shouldn't be doing this for appreciation. They should be
Mm.
doing this because they're serving God. And when we have that attitude, again, that's a false belief that we carry into things that causes us to be unlikable, where it's like, oh, this person's not going to appreciate what I did anyways. So I'm not even going to try it. Right. And then we just become predictably unlikable. But hey, so let's
Mhm.
talk about how do you start becoming predictable? And we're probably not going to be able to finish the whole chapter, but we have two kind of ways: is self-awareness and values. And the self-awareness you talked about is like, who am I really? And the way you find that out often is not by yourself, and it's often
Mhm.
not through your employees, because the reality is your employees are not going to be honest with you because
Mhm.
they're temporary in your life. You pay their paycheck, and then if you're unhappy with them, you stop paying them that paycheck, and then they're no longer in your circle anymore. So they're not the ones you're going to see who you really are. They're talking about it behind your back, maybe, or they're talking about it with their spouse. But really, counselors,
Hmm.
your children, especially teenagers, your spouse, those are the people that, or having a mentor that like is from another church that can like maybe, listen into a staff meeting and be like, wow, you were really a jerk there. And it doesn't matter if I'm in your life or not. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, me telling you that is not going to negatively affect me. There are a few ways that we need to do that, but being self-aware is such a key. And then let's talk about values before we kind of close. How do values play into this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it this way, values influence, think of them as a filter when you make decisions or when you behave or when you respond, right? And so I think values are the elements that keep you centered.
Hmm.
And so there's an aspect where values, have a hierarchy, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know what my values are. And so there are some ways that you can explore what those values are. I mean, in fact, if you were to Google it, there's so many things that are out there because you can't, you, you got to know them clearly in order to intentionally live them. And then be reminded that however your values are being expressed, it is impacting people. And
Yeah.
so I would say if you want to protect your integrity, AKA again, we're not talking about the moral, even though that's important. We're talking about the
Yeah.
predictable, consistent aspect of it. Then clarify those values, know them, live your values, and be reminded that they impact people. So I was thumbing through here. I know we don't have a lot of time, but when you understand that you actually probably already have values, you just don't name them. If you can name them, then you can make better decisions, right?
Yeah.
So is it growth? Is it family? Is it faith? Is it relationships? Is it, like I'm listing out some of mine, and
Yeah.
then you can know, oh, that's why when something happens, it triggers something in me because I care about relationships or I care about growth or faith or family, whatever it might be, right? Like one I have is grit, like or passion, like those are just some for me. And so you begin to intentionally make decisions off of those again, and how you show up predictably, consistently with other people. Be reminded this: you don't drift toward your values,
Yeah.
right? You can drift from them, but it's what are they? Live according to them, and be reminded that people are impacted by them.
And the hierarchy is so important because
Yeah.
uh, uh, we don't realize the hierarchy until things go bad. That list that we talked about in the beginning, when you're threatened or whenever the organization's taking a step backward, that's when suddenly these two or three values that I have to sacrifice one of them. I can't fulfill all three of them. We talk about in
Yeah.
the book the idea that, like, sexual fulfillment is a value that many guys and women have, and then a healthy marriage, or faithfulness to your spouse, right? Let's say that your spouse is suddenly dealing with cancer and you can't get that sexual fulfillment met. And so then you have to decide which one is the higher value in my hierarchy. Is my relationship with my spouse higher, or is the sexual fulfillment higher? Because
Mm,
we're going to, and sometimes we don't realize what it is. So I would say maybe probably a healthy step is to look at the last crisis you were in, see
mm.
what negative decisions you made, and try to figure out what values was I putting higher than I should have in the hierarchy. And that will help at least create that list of values. Then you can say, okay, I'm going to force that one down, and next time I'm going to try to consult this list and say I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if this is helpful. You may be listening right now and you're thinking, okay, like you guys have talked a lot about helpful stuff. Like where do I start? I don't know if this is helpful, um, but maybe you can use some questions to get going in the right direction. Because maybe you're listening right now and you're like, Guys, I'm so overwhelmed. I feel stuck. If you saw my to-do list, uh, I mean, the visits I've got to make and like the message I got to create or whatever it might be. When you think about these things, before you make a leadership decision, maybe you could ask yourself a couple questions. One, am I responding the same way I would on my best day?
Oh, that's really
Right? Am I
good.
responding the same way I would on my best day? If not, maybe hold off on the decision, hold off on responding. Second question is this: does this decision align with my stated values? So you got to know what they are.
Yeah.
So you could filter it through. 3, would my team say, oh, that sounds like Jason? If what I'm about to say, they would not say that, I need to press pause and not say that. And the final is this: can I clearly explain why I made said decision based on my values? Right? So you're keeping everything pretty kind of tight in this space. But if you
Yeah.
can ask yourself these questions, it can get you started in the right direction when you have to make decisions. Because here's the reality, Jonathan and I know, you as a leader, you make a lot of decisions, and sometimes decision making can be hard. Here's what we know: you want to get it right. And we hope this episode, this book, is helpful to jumpstart you in the right direction, because we believe that you want to be a likable leader.
Solid. Hey, we hope this episode was helpful for you. Again, whether you're following along in the book or whether you're just tuning in, we want you to get something good from this. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to follow us on social media, engage with us in messages. We'd love to talk about it, but we will see you next week.